Welcome back to Scale Model Kit Review. This is your host Steve. Eaglemoss has a bunch of screws they use for their builds. So in this video I'll show you what the screws are all about. Let's talk about Eaglemoss's screws for their kits. Now, they have basically two types of screws. They have a type that go into plastic and they have a type that goes into metal. And you can see they correlate with the naming convention of the screws. So for example, AP means that screw goes into plastic with the P. AM means that screw goes into metal. Now if you look, the threads are different on these two screws. The AM screw is more of a cutting thread. It's they're closer together, and a lot of times you are actually threading this screw into the part, and the part does not have threads on it at all. So in that case I recommend you lubricate whatever you're screwing it into. Now you can use whatever you want. You can use Vaseline, you can use lip balm like I have, whatever is available to you that won't make a mess. If you can control the amount of oil, then you can use oil also. But I would recommend a very light application of grease. Now you can see the AP screw on the right, the threads are further apart from each other and they're just having to thread into plastic. So give me a second and let me give you some examples of how this works. The screwdrivers that Eaglemoss provides for their builds are actually pretty good. Now in this case, for the DeLorean build, they actually gave us two types of screwdrivers. They gave us one bigger screwdriver, which would be like a PHO, and then they gave us a thinner, smaller screwdriver, which would be a PHOO screwdriver. Now I like them because the handle's a little larger and you have a nice grip where you can get a hold of them, and they are magnetized. After a while the magnet may lose its strength, and you can just always get yourself a magnetizer there and you can strengthen up the magnet end on the screwdriver just like that. Now a lot of folks go to aftermarket screwdrivers for their builds, and if you do, I highly recommend the Wera screwdrivers, and two sizes is all you need. You need the PHO on top, which is a little larger, and the PHOO, the one below it. Those two screwdrivers are fantastic, and they're called Wera, W-E-R-A. I have these available on my Amazon store. I put a link down below so you can access my store. Also the magnetizer, you can get that on the Amazon store also. So this is just giving you an example of putting a plastic screw in on some of the parts with Eaglemoss. So in this case, this is the water pump and water jacket. But you know, when you orient it just like that onto it, your screwdriver is magnetized to help you along with that, and it simply just goes in. Now you can let the AP screw do the work for you. You may have to give it a little bit of pressure there to get it started, and just as soon as you feel some resistance, you want to stop, because you could actually strip it out of the plastic. There we go. So they're normally not that hard to put in on plastic. Now let's look at an example of metal. Now let's look at putting screws in a metal part. So normally they'll identify the screw with an M behind it, like an AM, BM, CM, DM, EM. Okay? So in this case, this manifold, water manifold, is going to insert here on the end here. Alright, and it's basically just going to line up to the holes that are on the intake manifold here on top. Okay, pull that out, and if you look closely, they aren't threaded. The holes aren't pre-threaded. So you're actually creating threads with those screws. Now the Eaglemoss screws are pretty solid and pretty strong screws, but still you could get a screw that may have a flaw in it, and if you try to force it in there, it could cause the screw to break, or it could cause you to strip the head off. So to prevent that, you want to lubricate these areas here. Now I have been lubricating mine ever from the very beginning of my DeLorean build, the Aston Martin DB5 build, the Nissan GTR build. I've been lubricating these. It's just easier to get the screws in. You're less apt to have any problems. I noticed a lot of builders out there who have already completed these builds never used any lubrication at all, and they struggled with their builds. I mean, they complained about it. The screws broke off. They complained about the suspension breaking and all that. And you know, you gotta think about what you're doing. A little pre-planning ahead, and just a little bit of lubrication will help. Now let's talk about lubrication. I'll be right back. So here's an example of some of the different types of lubrications that are available out there. And it all comes down to whatever you have available at your workbench. So you may have just regular Vaseline available. I don't. I just bought the Vaseline Lip Therapy. That worked fine for me. You can also use, if you're an RCer, you can use some of the RC greases that Tamiya has out there, and they're just fine for doing lubrication. I wouldn't recommend a 3-in-1 oil. Why? I'll show you in a second, but I think 3-in-1 oil just makes a mess. If you want to do any weathering or any painting of your model, you want to do any modifying, like painting something after it's already assembled and built, or if you want to do any weathering, that oil is just going to go everywhere. And you want to have a little control of where you're putting your grease or your oil. And you can do that with these little miniature applicators that you can purchase at Walgreens or even at my Amazon store if you want. But these micro applicators will help you apply the grease to right where you need it. So let's see what these greases look like. Okay, here's the 3-in-1 oil right there. You can see it's just not much viscosity. It's just gonna go everywhere. Here's the Vaseline Lip Therapy. Looks just like Vaseline, has the same consistency as that. Here's the Cera grease by Tamiya, boron nitrate compound. And then here's the ceramic grease. They look almost the same. And then here's your AW grease, which is an anti-wear. Kind of looks like an anti-seize silver color compound. But those are the options for lubricating your screw holes on the Eaglemoss kits. So when it's time to install those components that go into metal, best way I find to lubricate is, like I said, with an applicator, with a grease that's not going to go all over the place. My hands still smell from that 3-in-1 oil because it just went everywhere, went all over my hands. It smells like machine oil. I mean, this has no smell to it. So unless you want to wear gloves all the time when you're handling that stuff, I just wouldn't recommend it. It's going to get all over the place, and you're going to run into some problems when it comes to painting or doing any weathering with that 3-in-1 oil. So it's better to use a grease that you can have control of. It has no smell, and eventually that grease will dry out from time. We'll put our part in. These AM screws are a little smaller, so we had to use a smaller screwdriver provided by Eaglemoss. And no stress at all. Remember, it's a lot of small threads that are cutting into the metal, and I let the screw do the work for me, and not the screwdriver. Fantastic. I do like these screwdrivers too. It's that simple. I was surprised that nobody else thought of this sooner in some of those builds I was watching. I've been watching the builds from the past from some of the builders, and none of them put grease on their screws. Just, they struggled with it. And there you go. No problem at all. So that was a review of Eaglemoss screws and how best to use them and how to identify them, and the different greases that you can use to lubricate. So with that, happy modeling everybody. Please visit my Amazon store. I have everything located in there that you can get. Thanks for watching everybody. Take care.